Hello and welcome to the Ship Shape Podcast, a series of podcasts where we meet amazing people and talk about their experiences, personal, technical, and all related to the maritime world. Come and dive in, dive in.
Today on the Ship Shape Podcast, we have Will Sofrin, writer, sailor, and adventurer. Many people might have seen the movie Master and the Commander, but let me ask you, how did they get the boat in the first place? Your two co-hosts today are Meryl Charette. I'm a live aboard on a Ta-Shing Toshiba 36 in Boston, Massachusetts, and Farah.
Hi, my name is Farah Kareem, and I am a media professional in the sense that I've been working in radio and television for quite a long time. That's about it, really, Meryl.
So, Will, where are you recording this from?
I am recording this from my wood shop out in Southern California. And
how's the weather out there these days?
The weather's pretty good. We got a bit of a cold snap coming through. It's going to bottom out, or I should say top out at 53 degrees in 2 days. So a little chilly for us this time of year. But I don't know. I'm looking forward to it. We'll have a nice fire in our fireplace and make the most of it.
But you know what? The sad thing is both of you are wearing T-shirts, so I'm really not very happy right now. Because I'm based in London and I am wearing a sweater or a cardigan because it's freezing. So no complaints, gents, no complaints.
So before we get into the meat of our discussion here, how exactly did you get into sailing? I know that you came from a very alternative household.
I did. I came from a very alternative household. My parents were high school sweethearts and went to college together, but it didn't really work out. Things shifted for them in life. So they dropped out and figured out a way, though. And after having me and my sisters, they both went back to college while raising us. And I think that their second individual approaches back to college helped them feel confident about what they wanted to recommend for my life choices when it came time for me to decide what to do. So come near the end of high school, there were some conversations mostly around a lot of support of saying, we understand that maybe college isn't for you, but you've got to keep learning. And so let's see if we can figure out an avenue where you find something that's interesting and appealing and you can continue to grow as a person. And so one day while a weekend visit in Newport, Rhode Island, we came across the International Yacht Restoration School, which was a new institution at the time. Today, it's offers a lot more. It's now the IRIS School of Technology and Trades. At the time, they were just starting their restoration program, but today there's now systems and mechanics and 3D printing. The school's really rounded itself out to better serve the industry.
Yeah, IRIS is the Harvard of the boat building school.
Yeah, it definitely is.
So at what point did you start getting into sailing?
When my mom married my stepfather, they got a Phantom sailboat, which is kind of a Sunfish knockoff. And then a couple of years later, we bought a Pearson Ensign that was in the woods and abandoned almost. And my stepfather and myself went and, not knowing anything or what to do, went and repainted the deck and the bottom. And I just had a lot of fun tinkering around with doing what we did. At the same time, I was working as a barback at a restaurant and making really good money for a kid in high school. And a friend of mine had a boat that had gotten wrecked in a storm in Southern Connecticut. So I bought it off of him for a few $100 and spent the next year trying to learn how to rebuild this wrecked sailboat. And I kept this log and this journal, and it was the thing that I loved the most when I was in high school.
And this is just you completely doing it off your own initiative, right?
Completely off my own initiative, and just...
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was a great way to spend my time. And thank God I wasn't making minimum wage, so I could manage to make the mistakes I was making.
At what point did you start becoming a professional sailor?
So I started becoming a professional sailor my first summer in Newport. I had already done a full year at IRIS, and I was introduced to there's a 12 charter fleet that's made up of the 12 meters. This was the class of sailboat that was using the America's Cup from 1958 to 1987. And the program director at our school, he knew some of the captains of the charter fleet and told me one day to go down to the dock and say that he had sent me and see if I could get out in one of the boats. And it worked out really well. There was this captain named Steve Harrison, who's still active in the industry, and he was the captain of Nefertiti, US 19. And Steve was very inviting. He invited me out that night, and after a couple of sails, I started getting paid to fill in on these boats. And boy, the whole idea of someone paying me to sail on those boats was eye-opening and life-changing. And I thought, well, I love building boats, but I think it's a lot cooler to sail them. And that's when I got hooked.
There is a saying, some nail 'em, some sail 'em.
That's a great saying.
And then you started sailing with the America's Cup, right?
So I didn't start sailing with the America's Cup. What I did was the year I graduated from Iris marked the 150th anniversary of the race that became known as the America's Cup. So there's this big event planned called the America's Cup Jubilee. And it was going to be like the Woodstock of sailing. Everybody from all around the world with all the old America's Cup boats was going to go to England. And I had to be there. So I did everything and anything I could. And somehow I got a job on America's oldest 12 meter, US 6 Ottawa. She was built in 1928. And it was because of my boat building background that I got the job as a deckhand on the boat. And so I spent my last 6 months at Iris. I'd go to school 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And then after I'd leave Iris, I'd get on my bicycle and I'd go over to the shipyard where Anna was being restored, and I'd work on her till 11 at night. And then I'd work Saturday and Sunday. But it got me on the boat, which then brought me over to Europe to race in the Jubilee.
So, William, just to backtrack, I mean, you mentioned that a lot of this was your own initiative. How did your family respond? Because you said they were quite different, quite alternative. So when you suddenly said, this is what I want to do, I want to go and sail, I want to build boats, did you get a lot of sort of resistance, or were they quite receptive and open to this?
My family was extremely receptive and extremely supportive of what I did. I think they all thought it was very cooler than what they were doing. And there was no sense of resentment, but only a sort of a great amount of encouragement. Sort of, that's great. I wish I, found that sort of passion when I was young. So we really want to help you get out there and go do this.
And no apprehension in the sense that you need to find a 9 to 5 employment, which, brings in revenue. So they just turned around and wanted you to live out your passion.
They did. And they were very supportive of the fact that I was young and that I had plenty of time to build a career. So it was definitely go have fun. This is your time in life to do this now.
I think we all forget that. That's such an important lesson, William. Honestly, we all forget that. We just don't do that for ourselves. We don't do that for our children. We don't do that for people around us. We immediately try to sort of box it in. So I'm really grateful you actually brought that up just now.
Yeah, I've tried to pay it forward. My wife and myself, for example, we every now and then we play a hooky day and we do the tourist thing where we live. When we lived in New York City, we would go out to the Statue of Liberty or go to the top of the Empire State Building. And here in Los Angeles, we sort of save those hooky days for doing the tourist thing. That's sort of my way of just saying, we're here now. Let's have some fun.
That's fantastic.
So you go and you're in this Jubilee, this big sailing race, and you're living like a king. And then you show back up in Newport and you're broke and there's no direction. Can you describe, what that was like?
Yeah, I was over in Europe for a few months, and after the Jubilee, we went down to the Mediterranean, and I spent every dollar I made at bars and restaurants every night and came back absolutely broke. And I don't regret it at all. It was the best decision I ever made. But it was a great reality check where I came back to Newport thinking there would be opportunity there waiting for me after all the hard work I had done. And that was not the case. The world was not waiting for me. And I came back to a barren sort of setting where positions on boats had already been filled. Boats were already on their way down to the Caribbean, and I missed my chance. So fortunately, the captain of Ottawa, a great guy named Casey Fashano, was the best sailor I've ever sailed with, really took me under his wing and let me live at his house. And I enjoyed being there, and maybe a little bit too much. And I think it didn't take Casey long to realize that he needed to kind of kick me in the butt and get me moving. So I didn't take advantage of his hospitality for too long.
So they'll throw you on a death trap.
So Casey one day tells me, you're going to go down and there's this ship in the harbor called Rose, and you're going to ask for this guy named Tony. Tell him I sent you down there and you're going to do some day work on the ship. And I knew that there was no opportunity for question or pushback. It was just sort of, okay, this is what I have to do and I'm going to do it. But I had been tortured by Casey and the mate on Ottawa, this guy named Todd. They had both sailed on tall ships together, and they had told me how easy I had it on yachts and how hard it was. So my apprehension was really built up from sort of all the nagging and ragging that they gave me on Ottawa.
Yeah, they're like, you're not a real sailor unless you're on a square-rigged tall ship.
Yeah, and everything's so easy. You have these nice outfits and this beautiful bunk to sleep in, and you go out to nice dinners, and that's just not how the sailing world is. So I was terrified about what I was going to be thrown into when I went down to the ship.
For some of our viewers here, can you tell the story of Rose and kind of its connection with Master and the Commander?
Yeah, so Rose is a replica of a 1757 Royal Navy frigate. She was commissioned to be built by historian John Millar in 1969 for the American bicentennial that was coming up. And financing Rose, I think from what I've read, was a little bit tricky. In order to get the funds to build this replica ship, Millar had to agree where it would serve a dual purpose and be able to serve as a restaurant, which really kind of cracked me up that this dockside attraction was really built to be a restaurant to justify the financing. So Millar pulls it off, though. He gets the ship built up by a yard named Smith & Rowland up in Nova Scotia and delivers the ship in time. But then what happens with this ship after the bicentennial? Well, she falls into disrepair. There's no business plan, no real future for her. And to get her built, she was built so cheaply that her materials were really quite inferior, the wood that was used for the hull. So Rose starts decaying and rotting. And in 1984, after a few failed sales of ownership, Connecticut businessman K. Williams, he buys the ship, and he's got this family-owned and operated marina located in Bridgeport, Connecticut, called Captain's Cove Seaport. And Williams is a visionary with marketing, and he thinks, well, great, we're going to bring this ship here, and it's going to bring people, and it's going to be a great experience for everyone. And then to take it up another notch, there was some changes, I think, in Coast Guard regulation where the ship could be certified for sail training. Around the time, there was this man named Richard Bailey who sailed on the Rose when Millar owned her, but Bailey had left and gone over to Asia and brought a boat back from the Pacific. He gets hired by K. Williams, and with their collaborative efforts, Bailey's knowledge, Bailey becomes the captain of the ship. They rebuild the ship floating in the water from the waterline up. And there's some great photos in my book of just seeing this 180-foot long ship with her planks stripped off and the new frames going in. But they pull it off, and they get the ship rebuilt and certified as America's only Class A sailing school vessel, which is a big accomplishment. So Rose then goes on to serve as an educational platform for up until being purchased by 20th Century Fox in the year 2000 to make the movie Master and Commander.
So obviously when, now it comes to you and you're being told to go and work on it. And what the next stage was telling you that you had to actually take the actual tall ship and obviously convey it and prepare sort of a crew with it. So can you walk us through the entire planning process? I mean, what went through your head when you were told you're transporting this boat, you're transporting it from Newport to Hollywood, you need a team of people, it's been rebuilt, everything's fine, get on with it, William. What's the first thought you had? No!
I didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, backtracking a little bit, I go down to the ship and Casey tells me to ask for this man named Tony, who's the chief mate. And Casey tells me about how great Tony is at spinning pizzas because he used to be a steward on a boat called the Mystic Whaler. And Tony made pizzas on the Whaler. I don't know how that relates, but Casey, is telling me all this. So I go down and I'm expecting to do this dirty work on the ship that nobody wants to do. That's why they've hired me as a day worker. They're going to hire me. And instead, Tony makes this pitch to me and says, hey, we've just been purchased by 20th Century Fox, which I didn't know. And do you want to sail to California to make a movie? And so like a deer in headlights, I just kind of sit there dumbfounded. I don't think I utter anything for a couple of minutes because I'm just trying to process that I got offered to sail to California to make a movie. And that was nothing I was expecting. And it actually took a little bit of convincing. I didn't say yes. I was very put off by it. I was unsure. it just didn't add up to me. So I went back I was invited back to the ship to have dinner and sit around with everyone. That still didn't work for me because the neat thing about tall ships is it's an eclectic community of individuals who come from all walks of life. And
going against your sailing sensibilities.
Yeah, I had worked so hard at Iris to master being pristine in the fine craft of yachting. And believe it or not, I look forward to polishing bronze winches and chamoising the deck houses. And Rose was completely different. I mean, the normal work for a deckhand, I talk about it in the book, is, you put a sock on your hand. It's called tarring the rig. And you take a bottle and you squeeze this mixture of tar and varnish into your hand. And then you lather it on the rig. And there's miles and miles of tarred rigging that could just use the deckhands all day, every day, forever to just keep tarring the rig. And so everyone kind of smelled a little bit dirty. And there's you don't make a lot of money on tall ships. In fact, a lot of people volunteer and work in the tall ship community, which is wonderful. It helps it survive, but
you would think, given the amount of work you have to do, you'd get paid more, but obviously not.
Yeah, we had a running joke going on the ship that was, join a tall ship and you'll make 25 cents an hour and get all the salt water you can drink.
So what eventually made you change your mind?
Well, one night I was sitting at Casey's house for dinner and he asked me what I was going to do. Have I made up my mind? And I said, well, I don't really know. And that's when he put his foot down and said, well, how could you not know? I'll tell you what, I want you to go down to the ship and tell Tony you want to go lay on a yard. And I had no idea what that meant, laying on a yard. But again, I knew that there was no room for argument. So I put my jacket on and I walked on down to the ship and I walked down below and Tony was eating dinner. And I said, Casey told me that I need to tell you that I want to lay on a yard. And Tony said, okay, well, come on, let's go do this. And I still had no idea what that meant or what we were doing. He got up and he starts walking up to the deck. And I brought a friend of mine down with me. And I asked if my friend Jared could join us. And he said, sure, come on. And we go up on deck and we put on these big heavy belts. And clearly I can see that we're going to climb up into the rigging. So we swing out and it's dark and we climb up the rig and then we transition out where you get out onto a yard. Now the yard is the horizontal spar that the square sails hang from. And you don't walk on top of the yard. There are these foot ropes underneath the yard that are connected at either end. And they're kind of like jump ropes that you're walking on. Right? Try and imagine that. So Tony teaches us or shows me how to lay onto the yard, walking out in the jump rope. And we get out to the end of the yard arm and he sits up on top of the yard and says, okay, well, this is laying on a yard. And from this vantage point, I free climbed and we're 60 feet up in the air and I'm looking out at Newport Harbor. And then Tony reveals this beautiful setting, trying to get me to imagine what it'd be like sailing in the middle of the ocean and sitting up here and seeing sort of that view of the world. And I don't know, that it worked. I kind of got what he was saying. I thought, wow, this is pretty incredible. So we went back down to the deck and Tony asked if I was going to take the job. And I said, well, I'll take the job if you let me bring my friend Jared along. And he kind of chuckled and said, okay. And so I accepted the job.
So can I ask, when you actually did do the entire journey, did you get an opportunity like that to lay on the yard in reality?
I did. One of my favorite moments in my life of sailing was we were in the Caribbean Sea and it was close to sunset and climbing aloft to there's three sets of yards. And so we have the lowest is the main and then you have the top and then the topgallant. And so going all the way up to the top by myself and just sort of enjoying feeling that wind blowing through and seeing our ship move and having that vantage point, looking down 120 feet and seeing the bow look so small and crash through the waves was just exhilarating. And it definitely made everything worth it.
Sounds amazing.
This show was sponsored by
shipshape.pro.
Ahoy there! We are shipshape.pro, the national directory of marine repair and refit. We hope to be a valuable resource for all your boat or yacht repair needs. Your struggle to find the best marine service ends here with us. We provide you access to the largest database of marine service providers across the U.S. Whether you are looking for electricians, engine mechanics, welders, detailers, divers, or any other general contractors, our easy-to-navigate categories help you save time and effort in finding the best service provider for the job, wherever you may be. Look us up at www.shipshape.pro or send us an email at info@shipshape.pro. We would love to hear from you.
Welcome back to the Shipshape podcast.
And one of the fascinating things about tall ships and just the history of tall ships is that basically you're out there for a long period of time. If something goes wrong, you have to figure it out yourself. And right off the bat, you were in that situation with the water maker of the ship. What were some of the unexpected challenges and obstacles that you ran into right before you started this trip?
Well, I think one of the biggest obstacles before we started the trip was we had a massive work list that needed to get accomplished to make sure our ship was going to be able to get to California. And this included repowering the ship with new engines, rebuilding the bilge pump manifold. We had to open up the deck around the foremast and rebuild the mast partners, which are the structural framework that prevents the mast from shaking the deck to pieces where it enters the deck. All the safety gear had to be inspected, make sure that it was certified and safe to ready for use should we need it. And probably one of the biggest challenges then was also the melding of personalities coming on the ship. Normal tall ships operate where you have a small percentage of your hired crew and then you bring on trainees. You're paying passengers or your volunteers so they can get this experience of working together in sail training. Where we were really unique and different is that we belonged to a private company and that was for profit, and we had a job to do, which is to deliver the ship. So the crew was a completely hired crew of 30 individuals, or 29, I'm sorry, which was very unusual in itself. And bringing in that melting pot of personalities where everyone is there for a job created a very different setting than it would have been had the ship been working as a sail training vessel for our journey.
And there were men and women and of different ages and different levels of experience, or?
Yeah, there was. I think that for the officers, Tony in particular, as the chief mate, was tasked with building up the crew of the ship. And obviously, everybody would love to have a full crew that's got tons of experience. But again, we're talking about setting into the winter of Newport. And by this time, a lot of people, if you were good at what you did, you probably already had a job on a great boat and you weren't there. So I think that there was a big challenge to find qualified individuals. And so we had a smattering of people who did know what they were doing and who were excellent at it. And then there was the blend of people who were dreamers, who thought, I want to sail and have this beautiful romantic vision of what that's going to be. And then there was actually a percentage of people who just didn't want to be there, but didn't really have a choice. There was, I say that there's this one guy who came from Cape Cod, and I think he was maybe off of his track a little bit. And he was great, but I think his parents, they were friends with the captain, and sort of it was kind of this is what you're going to do next. And there's not a question about it. We're going to help toughen you up. And also I bring in the fact that, we've got one of my favorite things about this journey was that we had a mix of men and women sailing together, which I think is really unusual. And all the books I read, or you see race boats, you have all men's teams or women's teams. And I've done deliveries from New England to the Caribbean where you'll have 6 people on a boat and a couple of guys and a couple of girls kind of a situation. But this was 30 people from all walks of the planet with different values, men and women living together. And when I say living together, we weren't divided up into this was the women's compartment and this is the men's compartment. We had our own bunks, but we were all sleeping in the same space and everyone got dressed in the same space. So decency was expected. It wasn't unusual, I'd say, for the Rose for this. It always worked this way on the Rose. There was a separate men's head and a women's head, but this is how Rose had operated successfully for well over a decade by the time I had gone on her, and it worked out well for us.
And at this point, how old are you?
At this point, I'm 21 years old.
Wow. Okay, can you share one story with us of an experience you had on the boat with this enigmatic sort of, crew, which is a mix of personalities, this melting pot of people from everywhere?
Well, one of my favorite things about this melting pot of everyone coming on the boat was it really prompted an incredible prank culture. There was a lot of humor on the ship. I'd be a liar if I said everyone got along. That just wasn't the case. You can't have people that walks of life all get along. And a real great way of sort of passive aggressively diffusing some of those situations was to play pranks on each other. And I think one of my favorite examples was a prank that got played on me. which was we were underway, and I got woken up by the watch before me to go up on deck, and they told me that there were some intense rain showers to make sure that I got all my foul weather gear all set up, and it looked like it was going to be a rough night ahead for me. So I'm tired and I'm waking up, and I put on all my foul weather gear and I trudge on up to the deck, and I look out the window and I see water just spraying in. I remember thinking, oh, this is terrible. This is going to be an awful watch. And I open up the door and I walk out, and it's dry, and it's a starry sky. And what had happened was the watch before us had taken a fire hose, and from, 50 feet forward on the deck where you couldn't see, they were just kind of spraying it up in the air. So it looked like we were in this big rainstorm coming down. And I thought that was one of the better pranks. Another great one was someone put a remote controlled fart machine in this thing called the capstan, which is like a mechanical winch on the ship. And this is where we would have our musters, our meetings before and after watches. And every time one of the officers would try and talk during his muster, that person who put the fart machine in would push the button from 10 feet away and interrupt the muster. And it just got people laughing.
And that's fantastic.
And then we set off on this journey. And right when you're leaving Newport, you still haven't even sailed this thing yet. So what type of mysteries did you come across?
So departing from Newport for me was a very doe-eyed experience, because as a ship's carpenter, I had really been tasked and focused to just do woodwork to prepare the ship for the departure, whereas a lot of the other deckhands spent their time working in the rigging, bending sails on, which familiarized them with what they were going to be doing. Because of our tight timeline, we really didn't have a great weather window to leave Newport. There wasn't much opportunity for taking the ship out to do some practice sails, sea trials. It was really going to be our officers are sail masters when it comes to sail training. So we are going to get underway so we can beat the weather, and we're going to teach everyone how to sail this ship while we're underway. Now, bear in mind, I'd say probably at least 10 or 12 of the 29 member crew had sailed on Rose extensively in the past. So there was a lot of experience handling the ship. But it also took some getting used to, because departing from Newport, we were broken up into 3 watches, and we were going to go into a 24 operational experience, which was going to shift and change the social balances on the ship and how we interacted and saw each other. There were going to be some people that I was just never going to see, because we were going to be on 2 opposite sides of the spectrum in regards to time, which was kind of interesting when you think about it, where you're living on this ship, but you're never really going to see each other. Did you actually never really see them? Yeah, I mean, you'd see everyone, but I might just have a minute or two of interaction. But there would be some people where I might not see them for a couple of days at a time.
Wow. So what were the experiences like, I mean, in terms of, interactions with other travelers or enthusiasts when they'd see you with this historical boat, this tall boat, which normally people wouldn't see on the water?
Well, I think that you see a ship like Rose, and it's a calling card for cameras and questions. And I get it too. I mean, if I see an unusual looking ship, I'm going to absolutely go out of my way to walk over or check it out and see what I can do and ask some questions. I think in America, I'll say in Newport, we had a lot of people curious and wanting to walk on the ship or check her out at the dock. But I don't know, we get to the third world, you get to Puerto Rico, and there was really no interest. Again, Panama, there was I don't know if everyone's lives were just so busy where they're like, oh, there's another boat. We really don't have time to talk about or look at it. But we did have some fun when we got to Cabo San Lucas. Another boat came out and shot playful cannon fire at us. They were blanks, but just kind of having fun sparring with these 2 old ships. And San Diego, we definitely drew some attention, docking right downtown in the center of the waterfront.
You brought the book Master and the Commander with you. So I'm wondering, how does sailing a historical vessel like the Rose connect you to the stories of the past of people that sailed on similar boats, ages ago?
Sailing a ship like Rose, compared to people ages ago, it really opened up my appreciation for sailors of the past, because life was just so hard for them. And I'm so impressed that they were able to achieve what they did. I mean, the Rose in 1757, in my eyes, wasn't very different than sort of a spaceship of today. It was the most advanced technology at the time. And you had these crews that were going to go sail to the far side of the world, the other side of the world. And they didn't really know exactly what they were going to see. Some of them didn't know how to swim. They were taken on board by force, not even wanting to be on the ship. And when you think about it too, I mean, just the whole idea, we sailed with a crew of 30 and the original Rose sailed with a crew of anywhere between 250 men. And the idea of trying to live with 200 other men on this ship just really terrifies me and makes my skin crawl. With no plumbing, no electricity, no modern medicine, no refrigeration. Those sailors were really very impressive with what they did. And I think what impresses me now most is understanding that they knew that there was no opportunity for failure because nobody was going to be able to come help them. Wherever they were in the world, they had to figure out how to fix it all themselves. Today, we have radios and satellites and all these resources around the world. But I mean, if a mast broke on the ship, they didn't have the wood to build a new one. They had to go find an island and go into the woods and cut down a tree and build a new mast. And to me, that's very impressive.
And your journey to Hollywood is very much the classic sea story of extreme excitement followed by extreme boredom. Can you talk a little bit about some of the experiences in the first part of your journey that were pretty terrifying?
Yeah, we departed from Newport in the middle of January, and sailing through the North Atlantic in January is not an ideal time to be doing this. Granted, it's after hurricane season's ended, but it's not a very inviting climate. So unfortunately, there was not a great weather window for the ship to depart, and there was a lot of pressure to get underway. If we didn't leave when we did, thinking was that the ship might not actually be able to leave for months. So knowing that we were going to be going into some bad weather, we set out. 4 days into the journey, we encountered a storm with sustained winds above 65 knots. We had wind gusting up to 80 knots and seas that were up to 20 to 30 feet. And I was a fair weather sailor before. I enjoyed being a yachty, and 20 knots on a 12-meter yacht turns your knuckles white. And 80 knots of breeze was something else I didn't expect. I guess I was aware that I might end up in something like that, but I just never really thought I'd find myself there. Truth be told, I loved every second of it. I was having the time of my life, and thank God I knew as little as I did, because if I knew what I know now, I think it would have been a very different experience for me. A lot of my shipmates on board dealt with it really well, but that can't be everyone. Some people had a really hard time with the weather, and understandably, it was terrifying. And it really pushed the ship to her limit. I think we sustained some significant structural failures, but we did make it through. And I'll say I did have a terrifying moment where one of the sails started to come unfurled, and Tony tasked me to go aloft with him. And free climbing up in the rig and 80 knots of wind and 30-foot seas that's something I wouldn't wish on anyone. But we did it, and I'm quiet as I think about it because I'm trying to come up with the words to tell you what it's like. I describe it in my book as being atop a 50-foot broken metronome that can't keep rhythm. And the wind is so loud. One thing that really stands out to me is you'll be on deck in rough weather on any boat, and your boat's kind of sloshing back and forth. But the higher up you go, the further you're swinging. So on deck, you might be moving from side to side a few feet. But when we were up aloft, I kind of did the math and drew everything out. We were getting thrown side to side 60 to 80 feet, depending on how big our rolls were. And that was every, 4 to 8 seconds being tossed side to side.
Was there a moment in your journey that made you question your own beliefs and values?
You know what? There was not any moments in the journey that made me question my beliefs or values. I'm sorry to disappoint you with that answer.
So how has your experience of sailing this boat impacted your personal philosophy, your worldview, how you see things?
The journey really changed a lot of my perspective on how I can motivate myself and other people around me. Before sailing on the Rose, I felt that I experienced a lot of leaders who were very authoritarian and maybe sort of abuse their power. Whereas on the Rose, I found that our officers did an incredible job of inspiring through their leadership. And Tony didn't make me go up in that rig. He tagged me and asked me to go up with him. And I was happy to. And I'd do it again with him in a heartbeat. I'd follow Tony anywhere, just like I would the other mates as well. And what I took away from the Rose that I bring to everywhere I go is trying to inspire the people that I work with by being kind. I believe, and I preach to my daughter, help the people that are helping you. And I really think that was the way of the ship was, if you see someone pulling on a line and you're not doing anything, go help them because they're pulling on that line to help you.
It's really sweet.
And at one point in this fateful journey, the rig broke.
Oh my God.
Can you describe what that experience was like? I mean, that must have been an absolute shock when you show up on deck and the rig of this gigantic tall ship, it's like 13 stories tall, is just messed up. We were halfway through in the middle of the Caribbean Sea, having one of the best sails of my life. And it was an hour before sunset and I'm waiting to eat dinner. And I'm down below on the gun deck and I hear this big explosion. And then there's this call for all hands up on deck. Run up on deck and I look up and it's so discerning because you have all these sails and you're trying to look through what's going on, but something's terribly wrong and you can see a broken mast and you see a sail hanging over another one. And the first thought in my mind was just, what do we do? I don't understand what I'm seeing. And again, at that moment, I think it was up there for just a few seconds when I feel that hand on my back and it's Tony and telling me, grab a belt and go on up. And so he marched on forward to the foremast and I went up the mainmast with our second and third mate, Andy and Christina. And Tony was up on the foremast with our bosun. And I remember just sort of climbing up and I'm sprinting up and we've still got all of our sails set. And I don't understand why, because you have a mast break on any boat and the inkling would be, well, let's take the power out of the rig. Let's strike the sail. Let's bring everything down. Let's decrease the pressure. But we didn't do that. And as I'm climbing up, Andy, our second mate, was at the top of the mainmast where the break had happened. Now, the uppermost mast had exploded and causing a yard on the foremast to snap in half. And by the time I got up to Andy and Christina, Andy had ascertained sort of the situation. There was more damage right where we were at the top of the mast, which would compromise the stability of the rig if we decided to take sail. I guess so. The fear was that if we took sail, we might change the loads and potentially cause more masts to break on the ship. So the idea was everything's stable at the moment. Let's be really methodical. Let's cut down what we can. Sunset's coming very soon, and we need to get the ship through the night. And again, just going back to the leadership of our officers, here I am, I'm 100 feet up in the air on the top of a broken mast that we're worried is still going to continue to break again. But I felt really safe with the officers as they guided us through the process of what we did to stabilize the rig that evening. And I've got some incredible photos. I've got in the book of, remember looking forward and seeing a silhouette of Tony standing out on top of the broken yard with his knife, cutting away the sail. And it didn't take very long for people to start cracking jokes, actually. And I'll go back to the humor, the prank humor. We really did a great job on the ship of diffusing our situations by trying to find ways to laugh. And I'd say maybe in the next half hour, we knew that we had a lot of work to do, but everybody was smiling on deck, telling stories again, and sort of you almost felt a bit of normalcy, like everything was going to be okay.
William, what was it like when you actually, reached Hollywood? It must have been very anticlimactic. I mean, this amazing journey, and you've experienced all sorts of things. You've seen beautiful sights, sunrises, sunsets, been with so many people, been away from all sorts of technology. You just had time, to think and just to be at one with nature. And suddenly now you're back in the hubbub of people. It must have been quite anticlimactic.
So I told you at the beginning of the interview where I was very excited about being a yachty, and the whole idea of sailing on a tall ship was something I was not interested in. And as I go through this journey, I go through this incredible internal evolution, and I really do become a more rounded sailor. And I think a better person for it. I've seen parts of the world. I've gone through these incredible experiences, and I felt like I was on this alien spaceship coming back to America, because we had been gone and we were our own little ancillary world on our ship. And even the crew members that I didn't get along with at that point, I was grateful that they were part of our crew, and I was grateful for them being there. So when we arrived in San Diego, I was actually very sad because even the people that I didn't get along with, our chemistry would be broken up. And after everything we went through, no one was hurt, no one died, and we did it all together. And I was sad that chemistry was going to forever be broken and not exist anymore. And coming back to America after everything I had seen was just very jarring. And I was surprised about that. I didn't expect that.
Did you crave being on the boat even for a while after that?
Well, not really. What happened was when we got to America, we were on a quick production schedule. We damaged the ship very significantly during the passage. So right away, we had to get to work on preparing her to repair her structurally and prepare for the transition from Rose to the ship HMS Surprise that you see in the film. And so there wasn't much time for lingering. What did happen was I had been offered a great opportunity to continue to work on the ship and sort of a guarantee that I might get a casted role in the film. And we were going to move the ship down to Mexico. We were going to film in Ensenada, where they've got the tank, in Rosarito, where they shot Titanic in. But Casey had offered me a job back east and on Ottawa, who had returned from Europe. And I don't know, I kind of felt like I had just done the real thing. And the idea of pretending to sail to make a movie seemed there was less of a draw than before I'd done. I just did the real thing, and I didn't want to do that. So I was kind of happy to stick around for a couple months and enjoyed what I saw in Southern California. But I was excited to leave and start a new chapter.
Honestly, through reading the book, because there's so many extreme experiences through the text, I was truly waiting for someone to die. But I want to hear what your idea is on the value of maintaining such traditions and preserving historical objects like Rose, even though in the present day they're impractical and obsolete.
I think it's crucial for us to remember our history so we know where we came from. When I was in my first year at Iris, I went to a discussion that talked about the theology of wooden boat restoration. And Clark Poston, a great shipbuilder, he was the director of education at Iris at the time. And Clark said something that really stood out to me, which was he kind of compared a boat to a chair at a museum, where he said, you can take a chair and you can put it in the museum and you can preserve it forever, but people can't sit on it. But if you want a boat to be preserved, you have to maintain that boat to be that vessel the day it was launched. You can't leave the planks on. That boat's going to sink eventually. And I think that need to continue to work and replace material, but still hold on to the core fabric of what that vessel is an important opportunity to continue to remember our history, but also serve as this great platform for teaching people how to work together and develop new skill sets through the process of learning by doing, which I'm a big proponent of. And I think that's my takeaway, what I've learned from sail training is it's a beautiful platform, but I think maybe it's challenging for people because it gets everyone out of their comfort zone. It's uncomfortable, and being uncomfortable is what makes us try and learn different things. So yes, tall ships can be impractical, but here we are decades later. And even though the tall ship community at times has trouble staying afloat, there seems to always be passion, and there's always sort of a recycling of people, new blood that come in and reinvigorate the industry. And it's proven that it works.
So just taking an offshoot from the question we just asked you, so how is the experience of being on the water, working on the tall ship, disconnected? You were disconnected completely from the distractions of modern life. You were not embroiled in the day-to-day. How has that influenced your perspective on technology today, its impact on society? So you're seeing, you've got your own child. How do you feel when you see all of this? Because you, at the age of 21, lived an incredible experience, which most people would never get to do. And you were completely disconnected. So you were at one with nature, with yourself, with people. You were absorbing in an environment and people and perspectives and everything around you. Most people don't get to do that today. So what's your perspective on that?
I love modern technology. I think it's great that we have phones and all the ability to see each other with FaceTime. And the advances, even in the marine industry, where I'll say navigating, for example, you could use I've got friends who told me that they just for yucks, they've navigated, a Pacific Passage just using an iPad just to see if they could do it. But my concern with all of our technology today is that maybe people are becoming less capable than they were and less innovative in different ways. Don't get me wrong. I think technology is helping people innovate in different ways. But I have, for example, with my daughter, a concern about her ability to walk around a city or navigate. So when we go sail our boat out to Catalina, I don't use a chart plotter. I know where I am and I know what I'm doing. I'm not putting us in a dangerous situation, but I break out the paper charts and I try and show her how to manually get herself from A to B. And I'm hoping that some of these skills, actually just even taking care of our boat, teaching her how to use she's only 7, but she's really good with the cordless drill. And I hope that as my daughter gets older, that we can use our boat more as a vehicle to separate from technology. So I can teach her some real world tools for getting herself from A to B. And it doesn't mean that she's going to sail around the world, but helping her understand to when she walks out of a subway in New York City. And I always say, let's figure out where the sun is and what time of day it is. And that way it helps me orient her for what direction where we're going in the city, if that makes sense. And to me, that comes back to sailing. Where are you in the world and where is the sun?
Now, when it comes to the book world and the sailing world, the fact is that this could be one of the last books about tall ships. Granted, people will still continue to sail tall ships, but it requires the effort to actually write book. So what is that feeling like towards you?
I don't think it'll be the last book about tall ships. If anything, I imagine that I'm just someone who put words to paper, and I hope that there'll be some other sailors out there who are tall ship sailors who might say, you know what, he did it. Why not me? Because there's a lot of great stories. And I think it's important for people to continue telling their stories, because that's also how we pass on experience and history. So I like to believe that there's going to be many tall ship books long after this book.
Awesome. So where can people find the book and read more about you?
The book comes out on April 18th. And you can go to my website. It's willsofrin.com, WILLSOFRIN.com. But right now you can order it pretty much anywhere on the internet. It's available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon. All you got to do is just Google All Hands on Deck, Will Sofrin, and it pops up. You can order a signed version on Talk Shop Live, which is a fun little sales platform. But in regards to my reading, I'm writing for a number of different maritime periodicals. And I hope to continue taking what I've learned from this book, and I'm already started working on the next one, which
oh wow!
So hopefully you guys will all hear from me in a couple of years with another book.
Do you have any other incredible journeys planned, like another tall ship experience, or are you planning on going on another journey?
I was very excited. I saw recently Amazon had a documentary about the race to Alaska, which is from Washington up to Alaska, and I'm trying to persuade a couple of friends to go in on a boat with me so we can try that Northwest Passage. I know it'll be cold, but to me it just looks like a lot of fun. Otherwise, in regards to tall ship sailing, I think there's the Bark Europa, which is sailing around Antarctica right now. Boy, and I'd love to get on that ship for a week and see some icebergs. I think that would be a lot of fun. But otherwise, I think it'll probably be fair weather sailing for me, just with my little 7-year-old.
Sounds idyllic.
Well, what I will say to all the people listening to this podcast, that this book is a must read. And I've read many books related to the ocean and sailing and history, and this is high up there. So, Will, it was great to have you on, and I'm looking forward to getting my signed copy.
Honestly,
you got it. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, William. Honestly, we've learned so much from you, and you did all this at such a young age. And, for everybody who hasn't read the book, just as Meryl said, just echoing the sentiments, read the book, watch the film. If you go on his website, I was talking to William just before we started the interview, and he showed me a little blurb on his website, and it's amazing. The waves that he's talking about, they're right there. I would have run. So it's amazing. I don't know how you put up with that. I don't know how you guys do it, but it's phenomenal.
Well, I really appreciate you guys having me on the show. And it's been so good talking to you, both Meryl and Farah. I've enjoyed this, and I love your podcasts. It's one of my favorites.
Amazing. And we look forward to interviewing again in a couple of years when your next book comes out, right? We get first dibs on it.
You got it.
Amazing.
Check back every Tuesday for our latest episode. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe to shipshape.pro.